and welcome back to another episode of the Lord of the Rings AMA podcast. My name is Matthias Austin, and on this podcast I invite you to ask me anything about Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, or anything related to the greater legendarium of J.R.R. Tolkien, and I will do my best to give you as in-depth an answer as I can. Now, before we start today, I want to give a big thank you to those of you who followed me on the various social media out there. I think I'm up to like 4 different platforms. I've got Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and YouTube, if YouTube counts as social media. And if you haven't followed me, hey, what's stopping you? Links to all of those are in the show notes. Now on to the show. This week's question was submitted to lotramapod@gmail.com, as all of our questions are, and it was sent in by Anna from Iron County in Michigan. Anna asks, what exactly is the Light of Eärendil, and why is Shelob afraid of it? When not warding off giant spiders, what is its purpose? Well, thank you, Anna, for that question. At first, when I received this, I thought there wouldn't be enough information to do a whole episode on it, as it kind of is exactly what we see in the books or in the movie. A glass phial that contains starlight. I mean, this is what Galadriel says when she gives it to Frodo upon their departure from Lothlorien. "And you, ring-bearer," she said, turning to Frodo, "I come to you last who are not last in my thoughts. For you I have prepared this." She held up a small crystal phial. It glittered as she moved it, and rays of white light sprang from her hand. "In this phial," she said, "is caught the light of Eärendil's star, set amid the waters of my fountain. It will shine still brighter when night is about you. May it be a light to you in dark places when all other lights go out. Remember Galadriel and her mirror." And that is all of the background that we ever get. We don't know whether she had this just sitting around, or if she specifically used her powers to capture the starlight for Frodo specifically. And as for why Shelob is afraid of it, now I think it's primarily just the fact that Shelob lives in the dark and the light is very bright. Here's how the scene goes when Frodo first uses the phial. "Then holding the star aloft and the bright sword advanced Frodo, Hobbit of the Shire. He walked steadily down to meet the eyes of Shelob. They wavered. Doubt came into them as the light approached. One by one they dimmed, and slowly they drew back. No brightness so deadly had ever afflicted them before. From sun and moon and star they had been safe underground, but now a star had descended into the very earth. Still it approached, and the eyes began to quail. One by one they all went dark. They turned away, and a great bulk beyond the light's reach heaved its huge shadow in between. They were gone." And when Sam confronts her later, the scene goes like this. "Now come, you filth," he cried. "You've hurt my master, you brute, and you'll pay for it. We're going on, but we'll settle with you first. Come on and taste it again." As if his indomitable spirit had set its potency in motion, the glass blazed suddenly like a white torch in its hand. It flamed like a star that, leaping from the firmament, sears the dark air with intolerable light. No such terror out of heaven had ever burned in Shelob's face before. The beams of it entered into her wounded head, and it scored it with unbearable pain, and the dreadful infection of light spread from eye to eye. She fell back, beating the air with her forelegs, her sight blasted by inner lightnings, her mind in agony. Then, turning her maimed head away, she rolled aside and began to crawl, claw by claw, towards the opening in the dark cliff behind. Now, my reading of that is just that this light is just really super bright, and as a creature that surrounded itself with darkness, the light physically hurt her. Like if you were standing in a dark room and the light turned on suddenly, but your eyes never adjusted. But this raises the question. Why is this light so bright? And what exactly is it? And to answer this, we need to look at where the light comes from. The Star of Eärendil. Now, if you've listened to last week's episode, the name Eärendil might sound familiar. He was the son of the human Tuor and the elf Idril, and we last saw him fleeing from the ruins of Gondolin. So let's follow his story to see how Eärendil the man is connected to Eärendil the star, and we'll pick up where the story ended last week. So yeah, if this is your first episode, I would suggest pausing and listening to the 2 episodes about Gondolin. Now that being said, here is the continuation of that story. The refugees of Gondolin, led by Tuor and Idril, journeyed south, and their population mixed with the refugees of Doriath, whose kingdom had been destroyed by the sons of Feanor in their quest to reclaim one of the Silmarils, the same one that had been stolen from Morgoth's crown by Beren and Luthien. And as I said last week, I don't want to go into too much detail because it deserves its own episode, but the relevant information for us today is that the entire royal family was wiped out, except for Elwing, daughter of the king, and she managed to escape Doriath with the Silmaril. And on the banks of the river Sirion, where it met the ocean, they lived in peace for many years. But Tuor and Idril knew that Beleriand was ultimately lost, and that this peace was only a temporary reprieve. There was no strong resistance against Morgoth, all the elven kingdoms were in ruins, and the evil of the sons of Feanor only aided Morgoth's schemes. And knowing that the only direct intervention of the Valar could overthrow Morgoth, they built a ship, and Tuor and Idril sailed into the west. Now their ultimate fate is unknown, for the Valar did not come back with their aid, but the elves believe that they did arrive safely, and that Tuor was granted the immortality of the elves, and he became an elf, and that he and Idril still live in Valinor. Eärendil was then named king of his people, and he married Elwing. Now, they both shared a unique heritage. Eärendil was half elf, half human, and Elwing had elf, human, and Maya, which is like angel, in her lineage. And Elwing gave birth to their 2 sons, Elros and Elrond. And living near the shore, Eärendil became this great mariner. But the more he sailed along the shores of Middle-earth, the more his desire to sail the wider seas called to him. Here's a passage from the Silmarillion. Yet Eärendil could not rest, and his voyages about the shore of the Hitherlands, Middle-earth, eased not his unquiet. 2 purposes grew in his heart, blended as one in longing for the wide sea. He sought to sail thereon, seeking after Tuor and Idril who returned not, and he thought to find perhaps the last shore, and bring ere he died the message of elves and men to the Valar in the west, that should move their hearts to pity for the sorrows of Middle-earth. So he went to the ever-present Círdan the Shipwright. The dude's been around since maybe the very beginning of elves. But he goes to Círdan, and together they built a great ship called Vingalot that was said to be the fairest ship ever built. Bilbo, in the Fellowship of the Ring, he writes this poem about Eärendil and his journey, and he dedicates a few lines describing Vingalot. In fact, it's how the poem starts. This is the first sort of stanza of the poem. Eärendil was a mariner that tarried in Arvernian. He built a boat of timber felled in Nimbrethel to journey in. Her sails he wove of silver fair, of silver were her lanterns made. Her prow he fashioned like a swan, and light upon her banners laid. Now I'm going to come back to that poem in a little bit. So Eärendil, he has the ship now, and he sets sail, seeking a path to the west. And we're told that he sailed the wide seas, but he was never able to reach Valinor. In the Silmarillion, Tolkien wrote, "In the Lay of Eärendil is many a thing sung of his adventures in the deep, and in lands untrodden, and in many seas and in many isles. But Elwing was not with him, and she sat in sorrow by the mouths of Sirion." And this is the great tragedy that Tolkien never actually wrote the Lay of Eärendil, which was meant to be this epic poem about Eärendil's travels. All that exists are fragments of a poem that was never completed from 1925. And there are some early drafts of the Silmarillion written around 1920 that seem to indicate that Part of this journey would see Eärendil traveling south, and he would fight and slay the giant spider Ungoliant. But he changed his mind about that, because her death was changed in later writings to say that she got so hungry, because she had this all-consuming hunger, that she actually ate herself at the end. So we're never really going to know what actually happened on Eärendil's voyage to the west. We're never going to see these far-off lands, untrodden lands to the south, or these islands that no one had ever visited. We're unfortunately never going to see that story. But eventually, Eärendil, he gives up his journey, and he begins to return home. And his timing was impeccable, because back in Beleriand, tragedy had struck. You see, the remaining sons of Feanor, and there were less of them at this point, several had died in their previous battles, but the remaining sons attacked the refugees living on the shore in an attempt to once again regain the Silmaril. And it was a fierce fight, and it would have been a complete disaster had Círdan and his people not arrived in their ships to ferry the elves to an island where they had made their home. But still, many died on both sides. 2 more of the sons of Feanor perished, leaving only 2 left, Maedhros, the eldest, and Maglor. And Maglor captured the twins Elros and Elrond, but he took pity on them and he cared for them. But Elwing, she was not able to reach those ships of Círdan, and in her desperation to keep the Silmaril away from the sons of Feanor, she leapt into the sea with it, hoping to deprive them of their prize at the cost of her own life. But Ulmo the Vala, who, if you remember from previous episodes, had for hundreds of years been giving aid to the elves of Gondolin, he transformed Elwing into a swan before she could drown. And she flew towards the west with the light of the Silmaril shining from her. And just before she reached a point of absolute exhaustion, she found Eärendil sailing east, and so she collapsed onto the ship, turning back into herself. And believing that their sons were dead and that their people were destroyed, they turned the ship back to the west and attempted once again to find a path to Valinor. But it went a little bit differently this time, because now they had the Silmaril. And Eärendil, he binds it to his forehead, he wears it, and the light of it cuts through the mists and the enchantments that protected Aman, the land of the Valar, and they reached the far shore of Valinor. Now, Eärendil knew that the Noldor were banned from returning, and he himself was half Noldor, so he feared that he would be put to death if he approached the land, and he forbade his crew from leaving the ship. But Elwing, she refused to stay, and jumped ashore, so that whatever fate befell Eärendil, she was determined to share in it as well. And they walked a ways together along the shoreline, but Eärendil said that he needed to go deliver his plea to the Valar alone. So Elwing remained by the seashore and met some of the Teleri living in Valinor, and she told them their story and she befriended them. Meanwhile, Eärendil entered the city of Tirion alone, the very city his home of Gondolin had been built to resemble. But the city was empty, as everybody who lived there was at that time in the city of the Valar, Valmar, for a festival. And he wandered these empty streets, fearing that all the elves were dead or gone, even from Valinor, and that there was no hope. And as he walked, his cloak swept up the dust and residue of many gems which coated the city streets, and the light of the Silmaril illuminated them, and he shone brightly. And as he turned to leave, dejected, he heard a voice cry out, "Hail, Eärendil, of mariners most renowned, the looked-for that cometh at unawares, the longed-for that cometh beyond hope. Hail, Eärendil, bearer of light before the sun and moon, splendor of the children of earth, star in the darkness, jewel in the sunset, radiant in the morning." And this was a Maya named Eonwe, who was the herald of Manwë. And he took Eärendil to go see the Valar. And when he was brought before them, Eärendil asked for the forgiveness of the Noldor, even those sons of Feanor, who had destroyed his people and captured his sons. And he begged for the mercy on elves and men suffering under the evil of Morgoth in Beleriand. And the Valar agreed, and the ban was lifted, and preparations were made for the invasion of Middle-earth to free it from the clutches of Morgoth. Then the Valar dismissed him, and he returned to Elwing, while they conferred with each other about what to do about Eärendil himself and with Elwing, because they were not immortal elves. They were mortal half-elves. Now, from the Silmarillion, we're told this. It is told among the elves that after Eärendil had departed, seeking Elwing his wife, Mando spoke concerning his fate, and he said, "Shall mortal man step living upon the undying lands and yet live?" But Ulmo said, "For this he was born into the world. And say unto me, whether is he Eärendil, Tuor's son of the line of Hador, or the son of Idril, Turgon's daughter, of the elven house of Finwë?" And Mandos answered, "Equally the Noldor, who went willfully into exile, may not return hither." But when all was spoken, Manwë gave judgment, and he said, "In this matter the power of doom is given to me. The peril that he ventured, for love of the two kindreds, shall not fall upon Eärendil, nor shall it fall upon Elwing his wife, who entered into peril for love of him. But they shall not walk ever again among elves or men in the outer lands. And this is my decree concerning them. To Eärendil and to Elwing, and to their sons, shall be given leave each to choose freely to which kindred their fates shall be joined, and under which kindred they shall be judged." And when they got that news, Eärendil said he was just too weary from his journey, and possibly it was his waning strength, being a mortal in a land built for immortals. His life might have been sapped away, and so he asked Elwing to choose for them both. And Elwing chose to live as an elf, and Eärendil did as well, though the Silmarillion says that maybe he would have picked human out of love for his father, Tuor. Now, the sailors that came with them were given a different boat, and a strong wind blew them back into the east. But Eärendil's ship, Vingalot, was given to Varda, the wife of Manwë, and she was the one who created the stars. And she transformed Vingalot into a craft made of mithril and crystal, and it was filled with a great flame. And Eärendil captained it, with the Silmaril bound to his brow, and he was set to sail it through the voids, a new star shining bright. And every night he flew through the skies, and in the morning he returned to a great tower where Elwing waited for him, and she would often fly to him in her swan form as he returned from his journey. But back in Middle-earth, the Silmarillion tells us this. Now when first Vingalot was set to sail in the seas of heaven, it rose unlooked for, glittering and bright, and the people of Middle-earth beheld it from afar and wondered, and they took it for a sign, and called it Gil Estel, the star of high hope. And when this new star was seen at evening, Maedhros spoke to Maglor his brother, and he said, "Surely that is a Silmaril that shines now in the west." And Maglor answered, "If it be truly the Silmaril which we saw cast into the sea, that rises again by the power of the Valar, then let us be glad, for its glory is seen now by many, and is yet secure from all evil." And the elves looked up and despaired no longer, but Morgoth was filled with doubt. And an army of the west came to Middle-earth with all of the Vanyar, the group of elves that had been the most faithful to the Valar, and the Noldor of Valinor led by Finarfin. The Teleri of Valinor refused to fight because they remembered Feanor and his sons killing their people to steal their ships. And the Noldor that were living in Middle-earth were not allowed to join in the fight because they caused all of this and were not permitted to share in the victory. But the three houses of men, the people of Beor, Hador, and Haleth, fought with the army of Valinor. And the army was led by Eönwë, that herald of Manwë. But the battle was fierce, and Morgoth unleashed everything he had and emptied the pits of Angband. And for the first time, flying dragons emerged, and they were led by Ancalagon the Black, the largest dragon to ever live. He was possibly, some estimates think he's miles long. And the forces of the west were almost defeated. But Eärendil arrived in his flying ship Vingalot with the birds of Middle-earth led by Elwing, including those great eagles, Thorondor and his people. And Eärendil slew Calagon the Black, and his body fell and destroyed the triple peak of Thangorodrim. And Morgoth was dragged from Angband, and he was chained and brought back to Valinor, where he was cast into the void, never to return while Middle-earth lasted. Sauron, like a coward, fled into the east. Most of the Balrogs were destroyed. It's possible that the one in Moria that we see, Durin's Bane that we see in the Fellowship of the Ring, that might have been the last one. That might have been the only one to have escaped. And some of the dragons got away, but most were killed, and the orcs were nearly wiped out, but obviously their population rebounded. Now there's more I could say about sort of the end of the First Age in that big battle, but for the purposes of discussing Eärendil, I'm going to stop it there. Because we see that the answer to what is the Light of Eärendil is that it is the light of a Silmaril, being worn by Eärendil, son of Tuor and Idril and father of Elrond. And this is a particularly important note, because it casts Bilbo's decision to make up a poem about Eärendil and perform it in front of all of the elves of Rivendell, Elrond included, it puts it all in a different light. As Bilbo tells Frodo, Bilbo says he being Aragorn, he obviously thought the whole thing rather above my head, and he said that if I had the cheek to make verses about Eärendil in the House of Elrond, it was my affair. I suppose he was right. I mean, I can't imagine the arrogance it would take to come up with a poem about the most famous and important person in all of history and then perform it for that person's son. But, Bilbo's just built differently. And that Light of Eärendil also acts as a connection from the great tales of the First Age to the great tale of the Third Age, as Sam points out to Frodo when he's trying to encourage him when they're in Mordor. Sam says, in regards to Frodo, saying that no one in the stories knows whether it's going to be a happy story or a tragic story, Sam says, "No, sir, of course not. Beren now, he never thought he was going to get that Silmaril from the Iron Crown in Thangorodrim, and yet he did, and that was a worse place and a blacker danger than ours. But that's a long tale, of course, and goes on past the happiness and into grief and beyond it. And the Silmaril went on and came to Eärendil, and why, sir, I've never thought of that before. You've got some of the light of it in that star glass that the lady gave you. Why, to think of it, we're in the same tale still. It's going on." Now, at the time that The Lord of the Rings was published, names like Beren and Thangorodrim would have meant nothing to the readers, but it spoke to the depth of this world, filled with stories and wonders in a way that made it feel alive and real. I'm going to end today with a little bit of trivia. Now, if the Fall of Gondolin was the first thing that Tolkien wrote in the world of Middle-earth, the name Eärendil was the first thing that made him want to write in this world. See, Tolkien, he was a philologist, and many of his studies centered on Old English. And he came across, in his student days, a poem written by, I think his name would be pronounced Cynewulf, an early Christian poet who wrote a poem in the 8th century in which he refers to the morning star acting as a herald for the dawn, which, metaphorically, it's like the coming of Jesus, which Cynewulf called the morning star Eärendil. Now, I have never before spoken Old English. I don't know how it's supposed to be pronounced, but I'm going to attempt to read the relevant line from that poem. So feel free to email in and correct me, but here's my best attempt.
Eala, Eärendil, engla björktast, over middan gerd monnum sendet, an så festa sonnan leoma, torcht over tunglas, thu tida je juane, of sulvum the sumle inlichtes.
Okay, confession, that was a recording that I found online, but it translates to, "Hail Eärendil, brightest of angels, above the middle earth," which means the inhabited world of men, "sent unto men, and true radiance of the sun, bright above the stars, thou of thy very self illuminest for ever every season." And Tolkien, he loved that name for the morning star, Eärendil, and wrote a poem in 1914, not connected to anything else, about the voyage of Eärendil, the morning star. And when he began to write The Fall of Gondolin, he decided to make Eärendil, a half-elf, a prince, and from there needed to figure out how to turn him into a star, which led to the Silmarils, which led to pretty much the entire history of the elves. And so, the Phial of Galadriel, a relatively minor object in the grand scheme of The Lord of the Rings, contains within it the very roots of the entire legendarium of Middle-earth. And the last fun fact is that the phrase from the poem, Hail Eärendil, brightest of angels, it made its way into The Lord of the Rings as the elvish phrase that Frodo says when he takes out the phial for the first time. Aya Eärendil, Elenion and Kalima, which means, Hail Eärendil, brightest of stars. Well, there you go, Anna. I hope that answered all of your questions, and maybe a little bit more than you expected, about the Light of Eärendil, where it comes from, what it does, and why big spiders are afraid of it. And if there's anything I said today that you wanted to know more about, you can email in a question to lotramapod@gmail.com, and I'll be happy to answer. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. Thank you all for the 5-star ratings and reviews you've left. Keep telling your friends about the show. Word of mouth, honestly, is the best way for this show to grow. As I said up top, you can follow me on Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and YouTube. I'm pretty much just LOTRAMAPod everywhere, but the links are below. Thank you, as always, to Michael for our music and Lauren for our artwork. And that's all for this week. Iluvatar willing, I'll be back next week. See you then.